Hey guys, Loma02. It's been a while since I've actually done one of these videos, so what I'm going to be doing today is, again, a video, deck tech and deck theory of play for a deck called Hot Tub Timemachine. This isn't the Canadian Highlander format, so this is a 100-card unified format that, again, only has single copies of cards. The most powerful of cards over Magic's history, of which have been pointed. Any given deck is allowed to have up to 10 points, with the most powerful cards having varied pointings from 7 downward. Or at least as of yet, the highest pointed cards are 7, of which there are only 2, Ancestral Recall and Black Lotus. In this deck, my pointed cards are Strip Mine at 2 points, Time Walk at 6 points, Crop Rotation at a point, Spellseeker at a point, and I believe that closes me out. If I find I missed one, I will let you guys know. I may have missed one going through there kind of rapidly. So yeah, it'd be 6, 2, 1, 1. Yep, that's it. So anyways, this is the interesting deck you have in front of you. I've kind of broken this one out a little bit differently. So it's kind of an awkward name too. So what is this deck up to? Well, essentially, Hot Tub Timemachine is a Landstorm deck. Despite having what appears to be a significant number of kind of like mid-range blue planeswalkers and creatures, it's actually more of a mid-range control deck, mid-range combo control deck. So this is a lands deck, and when I say lands, let me kind of cover the central part of the deck that I have right now. As a note, I am not going to have gameplay of this. I have a couple games of it, but I'm just going to do a deck tech on this one. So if you're interested in gameplay, sorry, I don't have any for this one. So maybe you come back and maybe I'll have some later. But I do think this is a pretty fascinating deck, so hopefully you'll stick around and get to kind of see what's going on in the deck, and I think there's a lot of room for growth. The first versions of this played Demonic Tutor over Time Walk, but this version is kind of shifted off of that to explore some different routes. But anyways, so the lands engine is this. Really, any lands engine deck. Well, not every lands deck is going to have a complete lands engine, and when I say engine, I mean once you establish this engine, the deck. You win the game. Like the deck cannot be stopped at that point if they don't have interaction to stop you from assembling this Tron. So what the Tron involves is this: Fastbond, for starters, is the most pivotal card. Came off points, I think 2 ban cycles ago, or 2 points changes ago. So once you get a Fastbond in play, you can play infinitely many lands. You take 1 damage. Damage is a relevant component of Fastbond because it's an old card design. You take 1 damage every time you play a land beyond the first one that you would have played that turn. So there's a cost to it. So this is the first and most essential component of the lands engine. The second part of the lands engine is how do you abate the cost of Fastbound, which is 1 damage per extra land after the first one. Well, you can do it with cards like Glacial Chasm. Glacial Chasm comes into play and says creatures you control cannot attack. When it enters the battlefield, sacrifice a land, cumulative upkeep, pay 2 life, and then prevent all damage that would be dealt to you. So essentially, you use this as a personal sanctuary to stop Fastbond, except for it's actually a pretty good card anyways. Glacial Chasm, that is. Another way you can prevent it is by playing cards like Courser of Crufix. There are some other cards that see play in more engine-focused decks, let me call them, like Jotty Offshoot, Grazing Gladeheart. There's a couple, I think, like Return to Kanzu or something like that. There's a couple enchantments that do the same thing. But realistically, like I kind of wanted the engine to be relatively tight in this deck and limited mostly to cards that I would not be embarrassed to play in like a mid-range deck, for instance. Glacial Chasm is a little more dubious in that regard, but it's so good at what it does that I think it's definitely worth it. And Courser of Crufix is really just a good green card. Like, this is just a good 2/4 Giant Spider body for less mana than Giant Spider ever costed, and it allows you to play cards off the top of your deck. Which actually also works very well with Fastbond, because the next drawback that Fastbond has is your hand size, right? At some point in time, you're going to run out of cards in your hand to be able to continue to play lands. So even if you've abated all of the the damage that you'll take off of Fastbond with Glacial Chasm and Courser of Crufix, you need to have a steady stream of lands to continue playing them. So how do you do that? Well, there are 2 ways. One from the Library Zone, which Courser of Crufix does allow you to do. And secondly, from the Graveyard Zone. So you have cards like Crucible of Worlds and Remnant of Excavator, which combine out very well with fetch lands, draw lands, lands that return spells, and then land death, Strip Mine, and Wasteland. So once you've established this Tron right here, and you have access to Strip Mine or Wasteland, it's not too difficult for like the discerning eye to see that at that point you have infinite mana. And the way that works is if you have a Fastbot in play plus Glacial Chasm, Courser of Crewfix, and Crucible of Worlds Remnant Excavator, you can use your own Strip Mine and Wasteland to blow up your own lands and then replay them. So you can basically make infinite mana of whatever colors you have available to you with the lands you currently have. If you have that and a Fiery Islet or a Waterlogged Grove, you can draw infinitely many cards. Or rather, you can draw as many cards as are left in your deck, and then you lose if you draw more than one, or X plus 1 out of your deck. Another interesting thing is you can also blow up your own Mystic Sanctuary while using these lands to take infinite time walks, for instance, which is part of the name of the deck. Or you can just be a lot more elegant and just cast infinite lightning bolts. So in a way, it's kind of like turning a lot of your cards into storm cards, basically. When the engine is complete, when it's brought to fruition, it has the ability to either draw to, a way to recurse the valid spells or the relevant spells you need in your deck, or draw to what you need in the deck. So basically, it turns the deck into, it's an engine. It draws infinite cards, makes infinite mana. That's kind of the core of the deck. Now, I could understand seeing this the first time and thinking, well, that's basically like a many-card combo, and it seems very hinky and kind of like unreliable to expect it to occur in most games. Like, all folks have to do is like blow up your Courser Crewfix and like you just lose the game. And that's not untrue, So the median game plan has to be relatively intact. That's kind of why I was saying I wanted the engine to be tight in this, such that like most of the cards, excepting like Glacial Chasm and Fastbond, are just fine on their own. Like, if you're just strip mining one land a turn, you're still in a pretty good spot, and they're probably not doing very much to actually win the game. But this deck is engine-focused. It's an engine-centric deck. So a lot of the deck is built in a way that enables you to find these options, to find these components of the engine. And because so few of them are just utterly horrible on their own, with the exception of maybe Fastbond. Fastbond's pretty bad on its own, but the rest of the cards are reasonable. Fastbond, Glacial Chasm, a little more dubious. But a lot of the card is built around multiple different tutor engines that allow you to set these up, and or find multiple components of them at once. So on the far left-hand side here, starting with the lands pile, I'll kind of cover some of the cards in this deck that allow you to find different components of the deck. So this is the lands pile. These are the lands that actually allow the engine to keep running. They're basically the fuel for the engine. The engine is these 5 cards over here, and these are the gasoline. So there's really 2 ways this deck wins the lands engine. Either it uses Mystic Sanctuary over and over again via using Strip Mine plus a draw land to redraw a spell infinitely many times. Or it'll utilize Grove of the Burn Willows, blow up your own Grove of the Burn Willows, so Strip Mine after returning Punishing Fire to hand, casting Punishing Fire, and then just redoing it over and over again to loop a shock. That's another way you can do it. It's also just a decent control combo, just to knock out small, little aggressive creatures. But basically, you have all of these cards that are fairly common in most lands decks. This is a pretty solidly 4-color splash 5th color deck. So I've it may seem I kind of got ham on it, but I have a lot of cards across the spectrum of Magic in all of the colors that enable me to really get after finding specific things, specific effects and specific things. So like Night of the Reliquary up next year, this is not a card that I think anyone would really bat an eye at in most Bant decks. It's not the best on its own anymore in just a Bant deck. I mean, like if you're just finding Gaia's Cradle and like Wasteland, maybe not the best. If it's being used that way, it's a pretty fair way to use it. But in this deck, what it does is it finds Strip Mine, it finds Mystic Confluence, it finds, specific fetch land, draw land, one of the Fiery Islet or the Waterlogged Grove. It basically just allows you to get after your mana. Withered Wayfarer, this card's similar thing. I mean, you have to be down on lands in order to use this, but it's actually not hard to get there because if you have partial engine establishment, you can use a Strip Mine to blow up your own lands and then use this thing to find a land. And then, if you have partial engine establishment with Fastbond, just replay all your lands. So that also does a similar job. Night of the Reliquary, evidently much less powerful, but in a deck that is utilizing its lands as a means of winning the game, I think a card like this is just fine. It's very efficient and cheap. Elvish Reclaimer, newer card here from M20. This card is OP. First off, it's a 1/2, which means that it's pretty tough to get forked bolted. Have your opponent get forked bolt card advantage. Like they'll have to fully kill this thing with a kill spell. They're not going to be able to get like a 2-for-1, like kill your Withered Wayfarer plus your Elvish Reclaimer or your other Mana Dork or whatever. So that's actually relevant. It also blocks a lot of tokens and just stuff like that. Like 1-2 just surprisingly becomes being relevant very often. And I think a lot of folks found that in like Legacy with Deathrite Shaman as well. But anyways, Elvish Reclaimer is kind of a slow way. It's a slow Knight of the Reliquary, and it does get a little bit bigger once you have enough. And you can beat down with this card. I have before, but more oftentimes than not, you're just finding using this once to twice to get some specific lands that you need to complete kind of the Tron of the deck. So you can go infinite, as it were. Crop rotation, pointed card in the deck, 1 point. Sack a land and find any land in your deck and put it on the battlefield and shuffle your library. Just great. Instant speed to boot. This card is very, very powerful. And before it saw a point, it was played in almost every green deck. And after seeing a point, it's still played in almost every green deck. Not every, but it's a pretty ubiquitous card in the format. It's just very powerful. And then in any sort of strategy like this, where you have powerful lands, such as pointed lands, such as Strip Mine, you tend to want to have access to them. Sylvan Scrying, this is a slow crop rotation. It puts it in your hand. But if you have Fast Bond, you're still playing it that same turn, even if you've already made a land drop. So this tends to be fine as well. And, this and Expedition Map are kind of like these slow versions of crop rotation. But they're still both very good and definitely strong enough in the deck itself. One more land I want to talk about before I get into the other components and how this deck gets after assembling the Tron that I kind of showed you in the middle here is Fabled Passage. Fabled Passage, could go over into this fetch pile right here because this deck is playing a basic of every variety except for Swamp. The reason I put it over in this pile, though, actually, is because it does have some relevance outside of just being a fetch land. One of the things that you'll tend to find in this deck is that the part of the engine that you most aggressively find are these cards in the center, and that oftentimes you still need one of these these draw lands up here. Fabled Passage actually allows you, and especially if you don't have like a life gain loop, or if you don't have if you have like one of these two but not both of these two, you're still going to take damage or life loss off of fetching with these lands. If you have Fabled Passage, you can non-deterministically, but at its outer limit, find any given card in your deck, right? You could put any given card on top of your deck. So like Courser Crewfix could allow you to put any given card on top of your deck. I'm talking specifically when you have Courser Crewfix in play, because oftentimes what comes up is, and I'm going to kind of jump over to another card, like you'll Savine's Reclamation back like a Courser Crewfix and a Fast Bond. And then you'll use like your Fabled Passage over and over again because you already have like a Raminep Excavator to end up finding one of these draw lands and then drawing your whole deck. That sounds crazy that actually comes up, but it actually comes up enough that Fabled Passage kind of belongs to, in my mind, over here because it does not that life loss does not occur like it does on the other fetch lands that exist. I think Fabled Passage just on first glance is less powerful, but because of the fact that you can sack it and it does not have a life loss on it, that ends up becoming more relevant in this deck. I guess I hope I'm explaining well what I'm trying to depict here. So, like, Courser Crewfix shows you the top card of your library. If you have Fast Bond, you can play infinitely many lands. Well, you could, if you can, it may kill you too. But if you have Courser Crewfix in play, what you can do is use Fabled Passage over and over and over again to basically. So I'm sorry, I'm not explaining one thing. So you'd think like with a fetch land, like Courser Crewfix would gain you the same amount of life. The problem is if you're trying to use a fetch land to do that, eventually you're going to run out of lands that it can fetch, and then you're just taking a life loss off it every time. So you're actually down a life point because you're down one life point from playing it off of Fast Bond. Then you're down an additional life point. You gain a life point from it coming into play. Then you lose a life point because you fetch with it, and eventually it's going to run out of lands to find. The thing with Fabled Passage is, yes, it can run out of lands to find, but you're not taking that additional life off of it, so you stay life neutral when you're trying to use it with a Courser, Crewfix, and Fast Bond in play to a Crucible, Courser, and a Fast Bond in play to find one of these two draw lands. And once you find one of these two draw lands, you just pull it off the top and you start drawing your whole deck. Or you can keep shuffling until you find what you want to draw, Is that something that's feasible to do in real life play? Probably not. But on Moto, it's pretty easy to do really rapidly because you don't actually have to shuffle your deck. It's kind of like I think what they call it, a non-deterministic loop, like Four Horsemen, I think is technically banned in competitive play. But this is kind of one of those things that comes up. It's also very enlightening from the standpoint that I got to do, this is going to sound a little bit OCD, but I got to do probably a couple thousand shuffles with Fabled Passage. And the Shuffler does do some interesting things on Moto. There is some clumping. I'll just say that. I actually set up an Excel chart and tracked down how many common cards that I saw after having previous hidden information of the randomized zone of my deck. How many of them came up cyclically via time? So, like in the next 10 minutes of shuffling with Fable Passage, I would see 10 specific cards, like 10 to 15 times, and maybe only the other cards I saw would be like 5 other cards in the deck. So there's a higher propensity of seeing certain cards, and they tend to be cards that you've already seen via some other means of looking into that zone of generally hidden information via cards like Sylvan Library, which isn't a problem per se if you're just playing like draw one a turn kind of Magic, because you never really know what the randomization was. But I think there's something in the algorithm there. That aside, because it is kind of a little nerdy and more technical, and this actually gave me a means of rapidly kind of seeing how the randomizer works for shuffling the deck zone. Fable Passage does allow you to randomize your deck to infinity, which allows you to eventually find one of X equals one exact card, which in this case would be Fiery Islet and Waterlogged Grove, to draw your whole deck. That's why it's over here. The rest is fetch lands. Fetch lands operate pretty similarly to Fabled Passage. In this deck, they tend to thin your entire deck out, get everything out of the deck, get you up on mana advantage, and just, they're pretty operative to the early, mid, and even long game of the deck. Just because we are a 5-color deck, so we need to make sure we're able to find the mana sources that we need to be able to cast our spells. Alright, so this next pile is kind of the pile that allows us to set up all of these engine pieces. So Spellseeker is relevant from the standpoint that it does a couple things. One, there's an additional loop in this deck. There is the Ephemerate loop. So if you're unfamiliar with the Ephemerate loop, Spellseeker gets played. Spellseeker is basically now a 1-card combo in this format. Spellseeker finds Ephemerate. Ephemerate gets cast on Spellseeker, which then finds Neoform if you have a 2-drop in play, Eldamri's Call if you have nothing else in play but the Seeker, or Diabolic Intent if you already have used your Neoform and you have another creature in play other than Spellseeker. And then what happens is, and actually at this point you don't even need the Seeker anymore. You could actually Diabolic Intent your own Seeker. You find Eternal Witness. So the Eternal Witness gets cast. I'm sorry, you actually need one more time. So you can't Diabolic Intent your actual Seeker. You have to Diabolic Intent something else. So you cast the Ephemerate on the Seeker, find one of those pieces. Use one of those pieces to find Eternal Witness. You then cast Eternal Witness on the following turn, or on that very same turn if you so desire. And you can find the next turn you're going to have an upkeep trigger for the Ephemerate. Ephemerate targets Spellseeker again, finds Time Walk. You cast Time Walk, cast out your Eternal Witness, return the Time Walk. Return the Ephemerate. Cast the Time Walk again, cast Ephemerate on Eternal Witness, return the Time Walk, and then on the following upkeep you get another Ephemerate trigger because it has Rebound. You target the Eternal Witness, return the Ephemerate, target it again with Ephemerate, return the Time Walk, and then you just Time Walk forever. Which is kind of a cool combo that you can do with the deck. At the same time, you could also use a lot of these cards to get after effects you may need. So, if you just need to find one of these components over here, if that ends up being easier, then you can use Spellseeker to find Neoform, to find, Raminep Excavator, Courser of Krufix. You can use Diabolic Intent to find specifically Fastbond. Seeker also finds Wargate, which puts Fastbond into play pretty well. It's also really good with lands. If you're not familiar with Wargate, it's a really cool old card. You see it sometimes in like eggs and in like Academy decks that are more Bant, or slanted towards Bant. But this card finds any permanent with converted mana cost X or less. So you can pay 3 and just find any land in the deck, which when you're playing a lands deck, it's pretty powerful. Because it turns out your lands are what win you the game a lot of the time in this deck. And it also can find, just Crucible of Worlds, whatever you may want. Just very, very powerful. So Seeker finds all of this junk here, except Eternal Witness. I guess it kind of finds Eternal Witness in a roundabout way because you can Neoform into it, Diabolic Intent into it. You can Eldamri's Call to find it. But Seeker gets all of this stuff. It gets Entomb, Life in the Loam, Tainted Pact, I guess if you really want it. Tainted Pact's one of the weaker tutors in the deck, but I'm still running it because it's powerful enough. It's just very specific. If you just need one specific thing and you've already got the rest of the Tron assembled, it can do that.
Another really cool card in the deck is Savine's Reclamation. So you may look at this combo and be like, hey, low man, like there's a lot of different moving pieces in this combo. Like what happens if they just blow up your Fast Bond, or just blow up your Corsair Crewfix, or blow up your Glacial Cat, blow up your Crucible of Worlds, whatever it may be. Like if you, let's say you have Crucible of Worlds, Corsair Crewfix, Fast Bond. Let's say they blow up one or maybe even two of them. Well, Savine's Reclamation is kind of an interesting answer to this. Earlier versions of this deck, before I ran Time Walk and ran Demonic Tutor, had Intuition in it, which offers a pretty interesting strategic decision you can make with Savine's Reclamation. Because these lands decks can make a lot of mana really fast, they can just go infinite on mana if they want. The higher casting cost on this card is not really a big deal. But the cool thing about Savine's Reclamation is I can actually just entomb this card and get back two things from my graveyard. Because we're essentially like a 3-card engine, that can be 2 parts or 2/3 of my entire combo engine, which is very, very powerful. And the ways you have to keep getting after this are like gamble. If I'm on a Hellbent hand, I can gamble for Savine's Reclamation, tomb Savine's Reclamation. There's just a lot of ways to get this card. Getting it into the yard, some of my just like good pile of cards like Dak, Royal Scions, just allow me to get rid of this thing too, which is quite powerful. And just, if you're not familiar, this card returns any permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard. So that can return lands as well. It has flashback for white and 4, and if you cast it for its flashback, you get to have a new copy of the spell. A thing that can come up in this deck is sometimes you'll ultimate your Renin 6, which already means you're probably winning. And if you give every spell in your graveyard Retrace, it doesn't exile it. So if you cast Savine's Reclamation for Retrace, which is only for 3 mana, it'll actually do the same things. It's only if it's cast from the graveyard, then it can still trigger to copy it and return 2 permanents, which is a lot of value. This card's very interesting from the standpoint that this card doesn't look powerful upon first inspection, but it's really without previous mode in the game. There is really not a card that does this for this rate. For any permanent, I guess I mean. Like, there's Unearth, there's cards like that are very, very powerful, but there's not quite a Savine's Reclamation where it just, can do damn near it can do any permanent, right? That's very powerful in my opinion, and it's one of the cards that really interested me in playing this style of deck, because I really want to kind of test with it and see which shell I could find to use Savine's Reclamation in, because it's just not a card that has been seen in the game before. There's not a card like this. I mean, you have like Order of White Clay and stuff like that do like creatures, but like nothing that just does all permanents. Like, you're just like, whoa, there's some weird ones, like I think like Obsidat's 8 or something like that. It's like a 5 or 6 drop, Orzhov card that returns like a Planeswalker, or maybe it's just permanent from anyone's graveyard, but like that's unplayable. But nothing like that was reasonable like this has really been printed, where it's like, wow, this is really reasonable, and it has some upside if you can set it up. Which in the shell, you have a lot of ways to be able to set it up. So again, this pile is Seeker, one of my other pointed cards. This pile right here is all kind of just land stuff. Like Life from the Loam is just a value engine in lands. If you get like a Wasteland or something like that set up, you can just lock them out of the game, or strip mine. Same with Renin 6, but realistically, like, Seeker is very pivotal in this deck, because it kind of is a crossroads to finding multiple different ways to kill your opponent. Whether that be through establishing a full lock via the lands engine combo, or, if you think you're against a very uninteractive deck, or you have already established a vast mana advantage, you can just do the Ephemerate kill with Spellseeker all in one turn. So all these cards kind of help set that up. Alright, so the Hot Tub combo. The kind of cooler combo. Mystic Sanctuary. This is a hell of a card, guys. So Mystic Sanctuary, 1 is an island. Who knows why? Who knows why this is printed as an island? So you can fetch for it, which is pretty sweet. You can use a lot of the fetch lands in the deck to find this goofball. And the interesting thing about this card is, when you first look at it, it returns any given spell from your graveyard to the top of your deck. When you're using cards like Fiery Islet and Waterlogged Grove, and you can go infinite on infinite on land drops, which means infinite draw at that point. Once you've established your engine, then you can play any given spell that's in your graveyard infinitely many times, right? Because you have infinite mana and infinite draw. So you can just keep on putting Lightning Bolt on top of your deck and kill your opponent. It could be Chain Lightning. It could be Time Walk, which is another Time Walk loop that you can do. The reason Time Walk's a little more relevant than some other combos that are in the deck is because you can take less life loss. You can go to the next turn and take one less damage per cycle of doing this, so you get more draw steps, or you have more opportunity to draw steps with less damage. You can also just regrow threats over and over again. You can Wargate over and over again for big permanents. Basically, the world's your oyster. Once you've established the engine, this deck has a lot of ways to exploit it. The core one of which is Mystic Sanctuary, because this actually allows you to kill them. One thing you'll note about this land shell is it's not running Dark Depths combo. It's not running... and no longer is it running Barbarian Ring, but you could. But it's not running Dark Depths combo, which is generally kind of interesting. Like, normally you think lands decks... Like, I tend to personally think, like, Dark Depths combo. The deck really doesn't need it. And, like, neither of those cards are very good on their own. They just don't really do that much. They don't really present, like, anything that's that relevant. So I think cutting them was one of the most important things I kind of did in building this. Is like, I really don't need these. They're kind of just, they're not necessary. They're really just dead weight in the deck. And Mystic Sanctuary is just that plus more. I mean, Dark Depths kills a turn cycle later. If you get Mystic Sanctuary going with, like, or if you get a loop going with Punishing Fire and Grove of the Burn Willows, you just win right on the spot. Like, you don't need to wait for another turn to kill them with a 20/20 that may get blocked by a Birds of Paradise or whatever. So I kind of think this in general is more elegant a finisher than using the Dark Depths combo is. Alright, so that's kind of the core combo component of the deck. I do think a lot of these cards, especially the ones over here, and even like some of these, are pretty flexible and decent cards in general. That they're decent enough that, like, you don't feel embarrassed to be playing them. They're not going to, like, shame you, like, to play them, whereas cards like Dark Depths are just like, okay, you played a Dark Depths, you missed your land drop for the turn and did nothing. Do you have a crop rotation? No. Okay, well, you're probably losing the game. But none of these cards are so horrible that you feel really bad to play them. I will say this. I've been playing more and more with Entomb. This card probably needs to catch a point. This thing is just so good. It just sets up so much in the deck, like Savine's Reclamation, Light from the Loam, specific lands that I may need while I already have a Crucible or Raminep Excavator going on. You name it. Or if I have a Regrowth and I just want a specific card, I can just Entomb and get the card back. It's, when you build your deck to really exploit Entomb, like, you can really exploit it. And it's kind of sad to say that, like, I think it needs to catch a point. I don't think it's honestly because of, like, Reanimator decks. I don't think Reanimator decks are even that great. I think it's because of decks like this. Like, I think you could just do so much with it that it's really a dangerous card. Like, honestly, Entomb plus Mystic Sanctuary is a combo, too, in the deck, because you just Entomb what you want to get with Mystic Sanctuary, which generally means Lightning Bolt, or Forked Bolt, or Chain Lightning, if, you want to be a masochist. And clicks on MTGO. Renin 6. I don't think I need to talk this card that much, guys. This card just broke in half. It kills little things. This is just a card that, like, people splash for now, and they should, because it's that good. It's just that broke in half. Just very, very, very good. So yeah, what are you gonna do? I mean, you're gonna die to it. You're gonna lose to it sometimes, and hopefully other times you win with it. Alright, so this pile right here is kind of like just the good stuff pile, but it's good stuff in a way that, like, it buys you time to kind of establish this engine. So there is some mana acceleration at 1. You have Birds of Paradise, Noble Hierarch, and Deathrite Shaman, just because they're the best. They're just really good at their job. Deathrite Shaman is actually disruptive against some decks. They just fix pretty well. I mean, this does all the Bant colors, which the deck's primarily Bant. Lotus Cobra turbos up your mana really quick and allows you to kind of allows you to do a lot more early on if it lives. Paradise Druid is hard to interact with, just sticks around, doesn't die. Scavenging Ooze, you notice I'm not playing Tarmogoyf. Scavenging Ooze is it's an interesting one to include, but, like, I think this is just one of the best green 2-drops in the format. Against opposing lands decks, this card just gets them. It just stops so much. And it's also a life gain engine, which is not irrelevant because it's not, like, the most active of decks. Like, we're not really aggressively attacking people's life totals. We're trying to assemble a Voltron that once we do, we just win all at once. So this card buys you a lot of time. Sylvan Curated, again, a hexproof, uninteractive wall that makes you whatever color mana you want in a deck that requires a lot of different colored mana resources. Great. Teferi, Time Raveler. This card is just very powerful. That's why it's in here. It helps you not get outblued by blue decks. It buys you time if you need time. It eats down an attack. It draws you a free card. Just kind of does a little bit of everything. And it's just so cheap. 3 mana is so cheap for Planeswalkers. Like, this card is just busted. Leovold, again, like, not really central to the core engine of the deck. Just a really good card that's kind of hard to deal with. And even if they do deal with it, like, you're probably drawing a card off of it before it dies. That's fine. Can also be Savine's Reclamation to back. Pretty cool. Renegade Rallier. This is kind of just incremental value. You get like a free land card off of it if you fetch the turn you play it, which is not bad. It's pretty damn good. All right, there it is. I'm sorry, guys. One thing's been troubling me. I've kind of been probably stumbling on my words. I've been looking for it. I was just looking for this card. I was like, where is my Polluted Delta in this set of fetch lands? And now they're all over there. I think this is only missing 2 fetch lands. I think it's 2 of the red ones. I think the red-black one and maybe Arid Mesa. No, Arid Mesa is in this one. It's a white deck. There's 2 fetch lands that are not in the deck. And one of them is Bloodstained Mire. The other one I can't remember off the top of my head. But anyways, so Renegade Rallier, just incremental value. You fetch for the land, play this thing out, get another land back. You could strip mine them twice. It's kind of a common card to see in like the mid-range style decks. I didn't quite go all the way up to like the Titania level in this deck because again, like Titania kind of followed the same logical argument that like the Merit Lage token does. Like it's really good incremental value, but like I'm not going to win that way. The intent of the deck is not to win that way. I don't want to make 1,000,000 power and 5/3 elementals and then like pass the turn and have to take another turn or take another turn afterwards to attack them and kill them. Like I want to just kill them all at once. So instead, I'm using my like incremental controlling spells like Lightning Bolt, which is intended to be a removal spell until I have the engine, and then it's intended to be a kill. It's Tendrils of Agony at that point, with the Mystic Confluence. But anyways, Renegade Rallier, just a good incremental game plan to kind of get your mana going. Maybe to provide some early disruption. I've really enjoyed this card in the deck, and it's just a good blocker, decent attacker if you want to go mid-range on him. Just good. Young Pyromancer, one of the few pure threats that I was like, I kind of do want to have this in the deck. Pyromancer is just such a messed up Magic card. At the rate it goes for 2 mana, like I was like, I do want to have some ways to kind of pressure blue decks, because I have not played this in a tournament. I'm not in Canada, so I don't get to play competitive Canadian Highlander. I live down in Florida, yay me. So I get to play on Moto. But Ben Wheeler actually took this deck to an event. Ended up going 3-1 with it. Said he got beat by a check pile deck. And as I was rebuilding the deck, specifically putting in Time Walk, Young Pyromancer was a concession I made kind of to some of the comments he had on how the deck played out. I think he was very happy with how it played out. I was pretty happy with a 3-1 result too. I mean, it's his accomplishment. I'm not trying to take that. I want the deck to do well too, if that makes sense. Like I take pride in these decks, and like I want them to do well, especially if I think they're a deck that like has something going for it. It has potential. And I really do think this like shell has potential. And I think it's a little bit distinguishable from most of the lands decks that I've seen so far in the format. But anyways, Pyromancer was kind of my concession to that. I was like, all right, well, we were like, yeah, let's put in Leovold. I think Pyromancer is also a good card for the deck. The deck does actually cast quite a few spells, so Pyromancer is not going to be an insignificant threat. It also buys you a ton of time if you just need time, because you can make a bazillion blockers with it, you name it. Next up, you have Night of Autumn. This is just a good way to deal with random enchantments, blood moons, whatever it may be. I honestly considered just running like Reclamation Sage to really get around Blood Moon. But one, due to the massive basic count, and then also due to kind of some of the concerns that Ben had about, getting out-blued by other blue decks, I was like, Night of the Autumn is just a relevant clock too. It's a 3-mana 4/3, which is a good clock. The fact that it can blow up, random back to basics, Blood Moons, whatever, is pretty great too. It can also blow up opposing Crucibles, fast bonds, you name it. So, card's pretty good. Alright, so now we get into my favorite part of the deck, the bullshit walls part, as I like to call it. So you have Wall Blossoms. I love this card. Like, the art's gorgeous. And, like, honestly, guys, like, this card doesn't look like much. I think if newer players saw this, they're just going to be like, this card's trash. It's a 2-mana 0/4 wall. But the fact that this thing just cycles, and against aggressive decks, just like, what are you going to do? You going to blow my wall up? I just drew a card off of it. You want to spend 2 mana to blow my wall up? Go ahead. They're probably still going to have to attack into it and then burn off a burn spell that's not going to your face or your planeswalker to kill this stupid wall off. Walls are just, like, these kind of walls in this style of deck are just great. Now, the problem with it is it doesn't attack, right? So, like, against the blue decks, like, you assume some risk, because, like, you have, some I wouldn't want to call it filler, but like you have cards that are templated more so against mid-range and fair decks that are going to try to attack your life total directly, attack your planeswalkers, and you play these kind of cards out just to get value. Like you just draw a card off this. The other thing is, I really wanted to play cards like Diabolic Intent. I wanted to play cards like Neoform because I think these tutors are very powerful to find other pieces of my combo, right? Whatever they may be. So because I think that Diabolic Intent and Neoform are worth it, I want to minimize the card loss that is intrinsic to these cards specifically. You get perfect selection off of these cards, but you lose cards off of it, right? Because you're sacking a creature to find another creature or thing, which in general is kind of a tempo loss, tempo and or card loss. Tempo loss in the case of Diabolic Intent, card loss in the case of Neoform. Actually, card and tempo loss for perfect selection of Diabolic Intent. So what I decided to do to actually make these cards kind of viable in this deck is I needed to have a decent creature density. But I didn't want to be a beatdown deck. I want to be a control deck. So I'm playing all of these walls, like Baleful Strix. This is just a good card on its own. Just 1/1 flying Death Touch that draws a card when it comes in. ETBs is great. It also turns into whatever else you want it to be off of Neoform or Diabolic Intent. Coiling Oracle, same story, can get you a free land drop, just blocks for a turn just fine. Ice Fang Quaddle, one, awesome art, I really love the art on this card, and two, it's basically like another Baleful Strix, kind of, Baleful Strix Light. Sylvan Library, just a good card. As far as other bullshit walls, I've got one more. I've got the Well of Omens in here, another 0/4. These are, the Well of Omens Blossoms, just love them. Like, they just block all day, draw you free cards. Great. Jace Vryn's Prodigy, just another value engine. Like, this deck doesn't really mind discarding cards because it's going to tend to be discarding land cards, excess land cards, in order to find relevant fixing in the early to mid game, and then eventually those lands that you've discarded are just going to become value later on when you assemble your Crucible of Worlds. Ramming Up Excavator, Glacial Chasm and or Courser plus Fastbond, like, you just get them all back. So you're kind of fine discarding cards. And then, like, again, the deck does have, like, some intermediate removal if you need to kill some stuff a couple times. This just lets you have a lot of flexibility in the early to mid game. Tireless Tracker, again, a card engine. This is actually another way you can go infinite without having one of these draw lands. You can just infinitely blow up any given land and then replay it and then make mana off of it with infinite mana without one of these lands. You can use Tireless Tracker to draw your deck, which is a way. So maybe technically it should go over here in the actual lands pile. It just has a synergy with it. But really it's just a good mid-range threat that you can use to end games that has synergies with the core engine of the deck. Royal Scions, this card has really impressed me. This is a very creature-like deck. But even with the kind of the smaller, crappier creatures we have, this can turn them into relevant threats. But the primary ability is just draw a card, discard a card. Looting in this deck is very powerful. I've honestly considered playing Careful Study in this deck and or Frantic Search just to get rid of cards, just to get through cards at the cost of cards, because eventually I'm going to get that value back from my graveyard, and it's more relevant to find what it is I need to do that than it is to actually have more cards in hand. So that effect's very, very powerful, and I've really enjoyed this card in the deck. Dak Vaden, yeah, just a pretty amazing Xerox engine. Again, we have cards of variable and sometimes dubious quality, so we want the right ones at the right time to kind of do what we want to do. So getting through cards quickly is very powerful, and the fact that this just grabs any artifact is very powerful in this format because there are Academy decks, there's Soul Ring and Mana Crypt decks, and that's very important to be able to take that away from them if they have that. Jason Mind Sculptor, just still one of the GOATs. He's up there. I don't know if he's still the GOAT, but he's really good. I think he's still the GOAT. So, yeah. This just finds whatever you need. Bounces stuff if you need tempo. Seals them out of a game. I don't really often find I'm trying to seal people out of the game. I win all in one turn with this deck, so I'm just generally using his brainstorm ability to find that which it is I need to win. This is all just basically kind of control cards, like removal. You have a Braid, and then like all the best white and red removal spells. Then you have some blue card selection over here: Sleight of Hand, Preordain, Ponder, Brainstorm, and then Faithless Looting. So that is kind of the deck. One of the things that I kind of am proud of in this deck, at least to this point, is that I think I've minimized as much as possible the playing of cards that do not have qualities or do not have merits in and of themselves. I've limited that as much as I could in this deck. I'm still trying to find more ways to do it. Like if I didn't have to play Glacial Chasm and Fastbound, I wouldn't. But like they're kind of essential to the core plan. But otherwise, I feel like most of the cards are not embarrassing. Like they all kind of just do. They have functions. They're all playable cards, which I think is really one of the strengths of this combo, this mid-range combo control deck. You see some of the lands decks, and like they'll have like Oracles of Moldiah, which is a powerful card, but 4 mana for a 2/2. Like we're well beyond that as being a good relevant play. I think in Highlander. Like I really want to mitigate having cards like that in this deck, because I just don't think they provide enough quality in and of themselves without other pieces and parts. So basically, minimize dead weight. Basically drop filler, put in killer is what it is. It's kind of how I saw that. And, even as a control deck, I think that's very relevant. And if you, like, actually look at the curve of this deck, it's very small. Like, it's just very low end. And, it may not look like it, but this is a control deck. It really is. And it's actually a quite good one. It's actually a pretty good one. So very, very interesting deck. Again, like, we're looking to looking to generate the lands engine, and then cast an infinite number of spells off of Mystic Sanctuary, ideally ones that kill our opponent like Chain Lightning or Lightning Bolt, or Loop Time Walks, whether it be through the Ephemerate Seeker combo or just looping Time Walks with Mystic Sanctuary. That is what the deck does, and, it's called Hot Tub Time Machine. I tend to call it Landstorm. That's kind of what the deck is doing. It's kind of a Landstorm deck. Except its storm win conditions are cards like Lightning Bolt and Forked Bolt. That's all it needs is one of those, and it can just kill you with it. But at the end of the day, it has a pretty decent median game plan. So, like, when I say median game plan, I mean, like, when you're on a median draw of, like, some of, like, the Turbo Lands decks, like, Jotty Offshoot doesn't do anything in and of itself. You need to have other cards that make Jotty Offshoot worth playing in your deck. You don't need to have more cards that make Courser... You need to have lands to cast it, but if you can cast Courser Crewfix, it's a card that does things on its own, whereas Jotty Offshoot really does not. It doesn't attack, it doesn't pressure them, it doesn't allow you to have a card advantage engine like Courser does. So basically, like, taking some of the older, kind of, in my opinion, more dated Turbo Lands deck building theory and tightening it up into really a core of good cards that are playable in and of their own right. And I think over time it'll win you a lot more games of Magic if you play it ad nauseum. So anyways, guys, this has been a deck tech and theory of play on Hot Tub Time Machine. It's a very low curve combo control deck. Very fun deck to play. A lot of different interesting lines with it. I hope I've done the deck a service. I will link the deck below if you're interested in playing it. But if you are someone who is into Canadian Highlander, you're probably on the Facebook. The list is posted there. I have not done any changes to it recently. I've kind of jumped on the new decks, but I want to put another video out on this deck specifically because I put a bit of time into this deck, and while I do think it still has some efficiencies to be gained, I think it's pretty. The engine of the deck is very interesting to me. It's very interesting from a creative standpoint, and then also just from like an engine building standpoint, because it really offers a lot of like interesting decisions when you're playing Magic. And then sometimes you just strip lock people out, right? Like, so in actual gameplay, like sometimes you just strip lock them out, and sometimes you'll be in these like really involved games that involve multiple sequences of decisions to actually get to a point that you can win. So the deck is very fun to play. Offers a lot of that. Anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed. This is Hot Tub Time Machine and Canadian Highlander, and hope I'll be back at you guys relatively soon with another deck tech and maybe some gameplay as well. Take care now, guys, and enjoy.